Good evening. Hello and welcome. Last August marked a sea change in thinking. For the first time in 27 years of polling, Gallup reported that the majority of Americans did not trust the police. Overall, public opinion may have seesawed again since that time, but substantial numbers, especially substantial numbers of Black and brown people, continue to mistrust law enforcement. The strength and resiliency of American democracy rests on trust. Trust between those we ask to protect and serve and the larger community. Trust that our vote counts. Trust that everyone is equal under the law. It's long been said and proven that a house divided against itself cannot stand. That's why our country and our city must find common ground, review and redo our processes and systems, and most importantly, re-examine our perceptions and our attitudes. Rebuilding confidence and trust between law enforcement and the community it serves requires a collective realignment. We need to change the way we think, not just the way we act. Your Columbus Urban League joined with the YWCA Columbus to host this event and learned from the tremendous leadership of the National Urban League. NUL has ideas, experience, and perspective that not only can set an agenda for America, but also serve as another critical turning point for Columbus, a step towards in the quest to regain mutual trust and respect. We are honored that Columbus was one of only 3 cities and the first of those 3 cities selected by NUL to explain and bring to life its criminal justice reform agenda. NUL's comprehensive platform, called 21 Pillars for Redefining Public Safety and Restoring Community Trust, centers on five key fundamentals to protecting and preserving life, dignity, and trust, as well as ensuring public safety. Many thanks to Mark Morial, President and CEO of the National Urban League, and his entire team for partnering with us, and for our co-host, the YWCA Columbus, Christy Angel, and our media sponsor, WBNS TV, for giving us Andrew tonight. We will begin with a message from Mark Morial, followed by some insights from Jerica Richardson from the National Urban League, who also will share her interview with national policing expert, Dr. Cedric Alexander. Next, you will hear from an amazing panel of our local experts and thought leaders, followed by some additional thoughts from Dr. Alexander. Then we're going to open this up for your questions submitted through the chat box on WBNS TV's YouTube channel. To our friends and colleagues who are honoring Yom Kippur at sundown, please know that our entire program will be available through our website, cul.org. We welcome and have created a forum for your comments and follow-up questions. I hope you, like me, will listen, learn, and lean in. We've got a lot of work to do together. With the help of the National Urban League and all of you, our community could become a leader in achieving constructive, enduring change for the good. Thank you.
I'm Mark Morial, and I lead the National Urban League. How do we redefine public safety to empower communities? That's the subject, that's the topic, that's what's on the table tonight, Columbus, Ohio, as we at the National Urban League bring our 21 Pillars Heartland Tour to Columbus, Ohio. A warm thanks and appreciation to Stephanie Hightower, the effective, impactful, passionate leader of the Columbus Urban League, And to the entire team at the Columbus Urban League and all community leaders and activists and elected officials, thank you for joining tonight.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jerica Richardson. I am the Senior Vice President for Equitable Justice and Strategic Initiatives at the National Urban League. I would like to thank the Columbus Urban League President, Stephanie Hightower, YWCA President Christy Angel, and WBNS 10 TV for co-hosting this necessary and timely event. Since 1910, the League has been working to lift barriers to opportunity for Black people and people of color in this country. And unjust policing is a huge barrier to our progress. Unjust policing is why the National Urban League decided to embark on its 21 Pillars Heartland Tour, and why we chose Columbus, Ohio as one of our first cities. Although often overlooked in the national news cycle, Columbus experiences one of the highest rates of police shootings in this country. Just last week, the U.S. Justice Department announced it will review the practices of the Columbus Police Department after a series of fatal police shootings of Black people and for its response to last year's racial injustice protest. Now is the perfect time for us to engage in difficult conversations about what redefining public safety in Columbus should look like. In April, we launched our 21 Pillars for Redefining Public Safety and Restoring Community Trust. The 21 Pillars provide a framework for advocacy that paves a way beyond the status quo. Our forward-thinking plan is emphasized by 5 key themes designed to promote the protection and preservation of life, dignity, and trust, while also building safer communities. The 5 themes are: collaborate with communities to re-envision public safety; accountability; change divisive policing policies; require transparency, reporting, and data collection; and improve hiring standards and training. Today, we will be focusing on Theme 1, collaborate with communities to re-envision public safety. This theme addresses the core of policing. Public safety must serve the people. Currently, the system inspires safety for some and doubt for others. This theme aims to lift the veil, to expose the truth about policing in America, to empower communities to richly engage in the policy-making process, and to lay the groundwork for community reinvestment. True community and law enforcement collaboration means the community is empowered to redefine what public safety looks like. And make no mistake, we are at a critical moment in history. We hope this conversation opens the proverbial door to redesigning the system. Without further ado, I would like to introduce you to Dr. Cedric Alexander. Dr. Alexander is a policing expert and law enforcement analyst for MSNBC. Among his accomplishments, he has over 40 years of experience in law enforcement, serving as the former chief of police in DeKalb County, Georgia, the previous president of the National Association, the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, and a member of President Obama's Task Force on 21st Century Policing. Throughout his career, Dr. Alexander has been pivotal in reforming troubled police departments and restoring trust between them and their communities. He currently sits on the board of the Innocence Project, working to exonerate the wrongfully convicted through DNA testing and reforming the criminal justice system to prevent future injustice. Earlier, I had the wonderful opportunity to speak to Dr. Alexander and get his thoughts on public safety in Columbus. Dr. Alexander, you've spoken about police legitimacy and trust. Our 21 pillars emphasize the need for truth and reconciliation. How exactly can we measure legitimacy and trust? And what are specific initiatives that can be implemented in Columbus to begin to develop that trust?
Well, first of all, let me say this. Thank you for having me here with you. Going back a few years ago, when I was appointed by the Obama administration to be part of the 21st Century Task Force report, there were 11 of us that was appointed by the president at that time. And we created a document referred to as the 21st Century Task Force report. In that report were 6 pillars that was adopted by the president at that time, 6 pillars that was given out across the country to virtually every police department that had an interest in terms of how to build and develop and create relationships with people in their respective communities. And one of the key words and one of the key elements of that report was this. In fact, the very first pillar was all about building trust and legitimacy. And that is hugely important in American policing, considering the history between policing in this country and communities, and more specifically, communities of color. But one of the most important things that we can do is that we have to have dialogue. We have to begin to communicate with each other. Police has an awesome responsibility, of course, themselves, because they have the power and authority that is granted to them by their respective states. They themselves have to be the one that really reaches out to communities that oftentimes may be distressed, in disparate communities that may be struggling, in communities in which historically police in those communities have always and in some way been at some odds for a variety of different reasons. So police departments and its leadership have a responsibility to reach out, have conversations, come up with creative ideas in terms of building those relationships, and understand this: there is no one thing that you can do. You can be as creative as you want to be, but it has to go beyond just a cop and a cup of coffee, or coffee and a cop kind of program, if you will. Those are great programs. But real legitimacy is built around the fact that the community feels that they can trust their police department, they feel heard by their police department, they feel respected. That is a form of procedural justice, which is another piece and element of that document, which I was part of. But those are very hugely important ideals that have to be adopted. Building those relationships come through communication. It comes through having frequent meetings and being creative as you want to, and coming up with a variety of different ideas out of how you keep the police engaged in the community, not just when there's a call for service, but in those times there are not a call for service, in which we can talk and chat and officers can get out of their cars. And the community themselves also have a responsibility to reach out and to accept that olive branch and to work collaboratively with good leadership, good police officers. But we cannot do anything until we begin to have those conversations, begin to trust each other, because that is your police department in your respective city. That is your police department there in Columbus. So ask the tough questions, hold your agency accountable, but also we ourselves as community members have a responsibility to be open and receptive and to work collaboratively with our local police in order to achieve a common goal, and that is one thing: public safety.
Since 2015, nearly a quarter of people killed by police officers in America have had a known mental illness. During your time as a police chief in Rochester, you implemented a mental health training program for officers. Other programs send a crisis intervention team rather than police to certain situations. But here in Columbus, the department has had trained crisis intervention team officers for years. Earlier this year, in fact, the city announced a pilot program targeting alternative responses for people in crisis. This new program will triage calls and determine the best response. Is there a best course of action to handle our police response to mental health crisis issues, which with incidents like the death of Daniel Prude and Elijah McClain captivating the country's attention, it is absolutely important. And it seems impossible not to wonder whether these methods actually work. What's your take on this?
So let me say this, each community, particularly post George Floyd, we've heard a lot of conversations around mental health, and mental health plays a significant role in determining the number of calls that goes out for service in your communities and other communities across this country. You're probably find those numbers to be pretty significant. One thing that we know that we're going to have to do in our communities across this country, even you right there in Columbus, is that we're going to have to assess and make some determination and begin to think about if we have officers who are responding to calls for service where there may be a mental health crisis. We have to ask ourselves this question: are our officers well-trained and competent to respond to those types of events? We can teach them the basic fundamentals. That's generally the crisis intervention training you just referred to as CIT. That is generally a 40-hour trained class. It is good information, but what it does not give in this current environment that we're in is an opportunity for officers to really dig deeper into better understanding, have a clearer understanding around mental health and how it impacts communities and impacts the individual that they're in front of. We have to go just beyond that basic fundamental training. But what we did in Rochester back in 2005 and 2006, being a clinical psychologist myself, I was able to create a program with the help of the University Medical Center there at the University of Rochester. We created an 80-hour program, and we made it specific for officers who had that training to respond to calls for service where there may be a mental health issue. So if a call came in through 911, if the 911 operator had a series of questions they would ask the complainant, if it appeared to be a mental health call, we tried to send one of those well-trained officers first. And what we noticed, because we kept data, is that those officers who were well-trained, deeply trained, not psychology trained as psychologists, but they had a very specific training and certification that we gave them. And we saw a huge reduction in the number of negative interventions that took place. Now, that was during early 2000s. Fast forward 15, 16 years later, many cities in this country have done a variety of different things, but where we are today, I think your community is going to have to assess what is it that we want our police officers to do. If we're going to have them respond to mental health calls, we need to make sure that they train and go beyond that typical 40-hour CIT training. It to be more specific, more targeted. If you're not going to do that, then do you have a program in which you can dispatch those who are civilians who could go to those calls? And having police there in the backdrop, if it's appeared that it could escalate into something much more of concern. So continue to have those conversations, continue to come up with different ideas and approaches, but understand your city, just like many cities across this country, have people in our communities that are struggling with mental health, and that includes drugs and alcohol. But it becomes important that a well-trained community, not just police department, but a well-trained city, have individuals who have the training, who have the certification, and it is their job specific to manage and handle those calls. And should police be needed to be in the backdrop, they are there, but they're not necessarily the first responders. So there's a variety of different ideas in which that can be addressed. And it sounds like what you have there in Columbus, you're working on. Watch it, follow it, evaluate it, and then let's see what happens as time goes on. But also important, keep data of the work that's being done.
Thank you for that, Dr. Alexander. it is clear that community and civilians being at the table is critical. And this is the new era and phase that we're in. It's really about a collaborative process and working together to achieve the goals that we all want to see.
Working together, quite critical. Our thanks to Dr. Alexander. We'll get back to him in just a moment. Good evening. I'm Andrew Kinsey, evening anchor at 10 TV at WBNS. An honor and a pleasure and a privilege to be here with you tonight, acting as your moderator, navigating you through this very important conversation. I'm joined by a wonderful group of panelists from the Columbus community who will share some insight and ideas tonight, quite important during this time. But before I introduce each of them, let's also invite you and remind you that you can submit questions. This is a two-way conversation tonight. We want to hear directly from you, and you can do that through the live stream function right now. Our team backstage monitoring those questions, and we will get to those as time allows throughout the evening. All right, to the panel now. Let me introduce each one of them. She is Columbus's new chief of police, the first chief from outside of CPD, and first African-American female in the post. Columbus Police Chief Elaine Bryant, thank you so much for joining us tonight. A woman who has broke many glass ceilings as former president and CEO of the United Way of Central Ohio, former Columbus city attorney, former judge, and now the chair of the Civilian Review Board, Janet Jackson. Thank you for being here tonight. And for 24 years, our next panelist has served as the pastor for Trinity Baptist Church here in Columbus on St. Clair Avenue for quite some time. He has demonstrated strong commitment to serving those in poverty and ending violence in our community. Our thanks to Dr. and Pastor Victor Davis for being here. And last but not least, tonight, a partner at Walton Brown LLP. Sean Walton is a civil rights attorney who has long been involved in issues involving Columbus Police and a leading member of the Columbus Police Accountability Project. Sean Walton, thank you for your work and for being here tonight.
Thank you.
All right, to get us started tonight, we're going to have an open conversation. Again, I want to make sure that this isn't stuffy, okay? I don't want people tuning out. It's an important conversation, so each of you all have some special sauce to add to this conversation tonight. There are 3 set questions, but at any time, jump in and add your special sauce. Chief, I want to start with you. What would it look like for law enforcement and the community to trust one another? We talked about this trust. What will that take?
It's going to take some transparency. It's going to take some dialogue. And most importantly, I think it's really important that officers are proactive versus reactive. We can't always respond to a scene for calls for service. There has to be positive interactions through dialogue, through community events. And so I think that our officers need to get to know the community in which they serve. So if you get to know your community, and if you have those conversations ahead of time, prior to calls for service, I think that that's going to build a huge amount of trust in our community.
Ms. Jackson, you sit on the Civilian Review Board for the city. This is something that voters voted, they wanted to have. In your opinion, what will it take for the community and police to trust each other?
So looking at it from the role of the Civilian Police Review Board, is for us to do our job in such a way that brings accountability and transparency as we review allegations and complaints, to be, again, as transparent when it comes to the police. But we also have a role to go out into the community and to talk to the community and to hear from them, what do you want us to do, specifically the Civilian Police Review Board, to bring about that trust? I don't come into this role saying that we as the board know how to do that. I want to listen to the citizens of Columbus. You share with us what you want to get from us to bring about that trust.
Pastor Davis, as a faith leader here in our city, you hear the complaints from those in our community, even counsel those who mourn after incidences. What do you think will it take to bridge this divide?
There has to be a return to some, what I want to call, community engagement from the police. There used to be a time in our community where the teachers that taught in our local schools lived in the community. The politicians that served us lived in the community. The police officers that protect us need to reside in the community. It's my opinion, of course. And that way they build a trust safety footprints put there because I know that my neighbor is police officer such and such. And that way, I believe there will be trust, transparency, and communication to build a relationship where community can trust police officers can trust the community.
Attorney Walton, before I get to you, I want to get back to Chief here. We talked about community policing, Chief. Is it possible to have a police force where we have officers living in these communities that they serve?
I think it is. One of the things that we're doing, the direction since I've been here, is we're trying to recruit in our neighborhoods. We want our police department to reflect the community in which it polices. So we're looking for officers, for candidates to join the police department that grew up here, that work here, that we want them to have a very intimate knowledge of Columbus. So I think that's important, and I think that it's very doable.
And if that is going to occur, the system of hiring them has to be conducive for the students to graduate from our schools to be prepared and work through that system. That there ought to be some, not understanding, but our young men and women who apply to be police officers must be able to go through the system and the process to become police officers. And there ought not be a great challenge because they are people of color.
Attorney Walton, I'm going to get to you because you have been on the forefront. You understand this topic quite intimately. You are representing the family of Casey Goodson Jr., officer, deputy involved shooting here in the Columbus area. Still no answers tonight to that case. So I want to switch the question around for you. Will there ever be an option for police and community to come together?
I appreciate that question, and I believe it's important for law enforcement to acknowledge the pain and the trauma and the injustices that have occurred to citizens over the years in order to build trust. And I think we can get there, but we cannot get there without acknowledging the past. And there have been so many people that I've spoken to over the years, whether I actually represent them or I've just heard their stories. I've done the research and I've investigated and I've taken depositions. And what I've seen is that we have a law enforcement community that feels attacked. And so for that reason, they're defensive a bit, and they will not acknowledge that there have been some bad actors, there have been some circumstances that did not play out as they should have. And so for that reason, it's difficult for the community to actually feel that we can trust in law enforcement because they won't acknowledge the ways that they have harmed the community. So going forward, as we're building trust, that trust starts with acknowledging that pain and that trauma that has been experienced over the years, and by working to heal by acknowledging that. And I think that's where we start, is that we really have to be honest about the relationship in Columbus with the police and the community over the years.
Ms. Jackson, you're no stranger to this city. You have held several important, key, influential roles here in our community, and we thank you for your service here. What strengths or positives does Columbus have to build upon to create that greater trust between the community and law enforcement? What do you see?
So I'm going to answer your question, but I want to follow up with what Sean said. and this puts a great burden on our chief. I believe there needs to be a change in the culture of the police department. We haven't really used that phrase. I don't quite know how the chief is going to go about that and the safety director, but I think it really goes to Sean's point. Now I'll come back and answer your question. Former judges have a tendency to do that. I think a number of things have happened in the last few years that we can build upon. The first was when this mayor acknowledged that there were issues and then appointed the Safety Advisory Commission that I chaired. And so that commission of 17 individuals really looked into our police department. We reviewed everything they did, and we came up with 80 recommendations to improve the department, including creating the Office of the Inspector General and the creation of the Civilian Police Review Board. Going forward, I think we're beginning to see, again, that greater trust by the selection of Chief Bryant as our police chief, and then more recently, the selection of our new public safety director. I think that all of these steps should show the community that the elected leadership in Columbus, both city council members led by Council President Shannon Hardin and the mayor, are really genuinely going to change what has happened in our community.
Chief, I want to give you an opportunity to reply to that. We know that last week The Department of Justice chimed in and said, yes, we will come in and take a look. Is that part of that change, making that systemic change within the police department?
Absolutely. I think that that is a step in the right direction. To her point, it is extremely important that we acknowledge, that there have been some issues within the police department, between the community and law enforcement. I make no mistake about saying I am one of the first, and I've said it from the very beginning. There are issues across the nation in regards to law enforcement and the community, and we have to address that. We cannot act like it doesn't exist, and we cannot act like people haven't been harmed, and that there isn't some trauma that's deeply embedded and rooted behind some of the things that have occurred. We have to acknowledge that, and that is part of that culture. When you talk about it, it's up to the leadership to start making those changes. And I think by me sitting here, having this conversation with you, we are showing that we're moving in the right direction, because I am the first. I'm the first outside chief. I'm the first African-American female. And I will tell you that one of the things that I see coming in this department is these officers, when we talk about that particular question, what are strengths or positives does Columbus have? You have officers, young officers, that want to engage the community. You have officers that are ready to do that. Some of them just didn't know how or what to do. Leadership is extremely important, and accountability is extremely important. So I think that, to build upon what she said, we have to make sure that we're the ones that are going to hold our officers or hold our police department accountable, and we're the ones that are going to be transparent with the community and say, these are the issues, these are the things that we feel we need to fix, and we're going to ask for help. We're not going to do it, we can't do it alone. So that's going to be a partnership between the community, law enforcement, clergy. We need all hands on deck to be able to figure out what we need to do to move this department forward. But the strength and positive things are we have the tools necessary to make it happen. We just have to have those courageous conversations and be ready to buckle down and do the work.
Pastor, I know you've seen some positives in our community, but I want to ask you, do people here in our community, do they feel heard?
Do they feel heard? No, they don't. They don't feel like anyone cares, especially our younger generation. They somehow have read that scripture that says, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you will die. There is no value for life, not even their own lives. And what has happened across the nation, the return of very forward racism, the attack on black men, has all affected our young people in a way where they have no value of life and trust of anybody in leadership. The pulpit, the police officers, the elected officials, they have been desensitized to caring for others. And subsequently, if I commit a crime and I get shot, I got my piece on me. If he takes me out, let's go. Let's see what happens.
And hence where we are now in homicide rates in our city.
Exactly.
Unfortunate here in the city of Columbus. Just saw the chief on the media earlier today pleading with the public to come forward. Chief, as a mother, how does that feel to come into this role and seeing so many of our youth?
It's heartbreaking. My first day on the job, day on the job,
Remember that.
that 17-year-old beautiful young lady, she lost her life. Mackenzie Ridley. I will never forget it. That was my introduction to being the chief of police for Columbus. And all she wanted to do was have fun with her friends at the park. All they wanted to do was enjoy their summer. And she lost her life. Senseless violence. Just like the pastor said, we have to figure out what we're going to do with our youth. And we have to figure out how to reach them, because a lot of this is conflict resolution. They don't know. Yeah. And a lot of this is, unfortunately, it's not, like I said, we can't arrest our way out of crime. We have to take a holistic approach. So we have to get to the root of what the issues are. We have to heal that family. It's not just the child, but it's the family. Because if we don't do that, we're going to wind up in this vicious cycle. So it's heartbreaking, and as a mother of two young men, 19 and 21 years old, it frightens me sometimes. It frightens me to know, that there's so many guns out on the street, that they're so accessible, and people are so ready to use them without thought or regard for life.
Attorney Walton, are we any different than we were a summer ago when we were at the State House with signs and bullhorns calling for accountability, police reform? Are we anywhere different than we were a summer ago? Is there any positives to build on to where we are now?
One positive is that we have a new police chief, and I commend and support her, in this journey. Going back to last summer, I'll remind everyone that what we saw was a very violent and aggressive response by Columbus police to those nonviolent protesters, a response that was strongly criticized by Judge Marbley, and I also represent some of those protesters. And we also saw our chair of the CBC, our Congresswoman Joyce Beatty, our City Council President Shannon Harden, and our County Commissioner Kevin Boyce. They were pepper sprayed in the face right there. And that is very symbolic in terms of the relationship between Columbus citizens and the police. Our elected officials, our representatives were attacked. And so I don't think we're anywhere different. We are aware that this stuff is happening, and that happened in front of the State House in broad daylight. And again, we have not acknowledged the past harms. We protested, and there were protests around the murder of George Floyd. What folks did not understand was that people in Columbus were fed up with Columbus police. There was not a response to George Floyd. That was a response to Henry Green, Tyree King, Jerron Thomas, Deontay Bill. I could continue and say the names over and over again because those names have not been said enough. Columbus flies under the radar. And so until we actually investigate the past practices of the Columbus police, we're not going to be able to move forward because those officers are still in place. The officer that killed Tyree King, that was his fourth shooting. He is still employed, and he was also promoted to detective. Zachary Rosen is stomped on the head of DeMarco Anderson, who I also represented. That was caught on cell phone video. The city fired him. He was able to get his job back, and he's now a detective. So there's no fear of accountability, and because of that fear of accountability, we're nowhere, with any improvement in terms of the relations with the community and the police because there has been no accountability, and we don't trust that there will be accountability until we actually see that.
Key word there,
And
trust.
by the way, there has not been a public apology for what happened to our elected officials, to my knowledge, to this day.
You used the word trust there. Ms. Jackson, Dr. Alexander, we heard from before this forum started, he said that the legitimacy of law enforcement is real only when the community says it is. Is Columbus ready to confer that legitimacy? If not, what still needs to be done to get us to that goal?
I would say that at this point in time, no, that the community is not ready to consider that legitimacy. But I think we've started down a path to get there. I would agree with Sean. A part of it is about accountability. So I would certainly hope that as the Civilian Police Review Board moves forward with our work, and that you now have this separate entity that is not connected to the police department at all, that will be investigating some of these matters and then making recommendations to the chief and the safety director, that there will be some change. I believe that there will be change because we do have a new chief and a new, safety director. And I believe that you have leaders in place who have said, we want this and we're working towards this. It's not business as usual. But I think because, of the history, the community will take a wait and see attitude. They will wait to see how we do our jobs, and as we do our jobs, will we bring about change and sustain change.
Chief, to hear that we're not there just yet, how does that make you feel?
I have less than 3 months on the job. I just want to remind, it feels like 3 years, but it's less than 3 months on the job. And I will tell you that coming from an extremely strong community relations background, I'm hopeful that we can get there. I really believe that the work that my team and I are ready to do, roll up our sleeves, that we can get there. I think that it's going to take a lot of open communication. It's going to take a lot of, like I said, courageous conversations. It's going to take people coming to the table from all sides to be able to sit down and have that conversation and acknowledge some past hurt, to acknowledge some situations that we have never resolved yet, and to be able to say, okay, how do we move forward? There has been so many traumatic incidents. And, you know, as a female, as a black female, I feel internally a lot of things. But I also, as a professional, I have to put my hat on and say, okay, I can feel this and I can acknowledge it, but how do I fix it? What do I do to go about making this change and making it sustainable? I don't want to make changes that are fleeting or by night. They have to be thoughtful, and they have to be what's best for the community, what's best for the officers, what's best for the businesses, the people that live, work, and play here. What can we do to move this department forward, to move the community forward in the right direction? A big part of that is accountability. We talk about that word and people throw it around, but rest assured, accountability starts with the leadership. So when you were little, you remember when if your mother put her foot down about something and she gave you a look, she meant that. If she didn't care, what did you do? You kept doing it. So it's all about making sure that we're the ones that set that tone as leaders, all of our seats. Your seat, extremely important. My seat, the director's seat, you know, you're holding us accountable. We don't have a problem with that. We want to make sure that we're open and transparent and we have that conversation, because I want to make sure that everybody's voice is at that table. I'm not going to make decisions without making sure that it's best for everyone involved.
Sean, I want to get to you. For those families that you represent, has all hope been lost for them in trusting law enforcement, or do they feel that there will be some accountability and that trust can be rebuilt?
We have no choice but to hope that trust can be rebuilt and that we will be protected and served by law enforcement, because we're at their mercy, right? So for the families I represent and the folks I've spoken to over the years, there's not a lot of hope, because what we see time and time again is what feels like politics as usual in Columbus. On April 29th, there was a broad coalition of clergy, attorneys, politicians, and activists who came together to demand that the DOJ investigate the patterns and practices of the Columbus Police Department. And there were over 55 endorsing organizations of that request. And to the point about being heard, it seems like that was ignored, and instead there's a review that's not an actual investigation. And so time and time again, we see a lack of emphasis put on acknowledging the harms of the past. The officers that have been involved in some of the injustices of the past few years, again, like I said, are still employed. They are in leadership within the division. And so in talking about reforming the culture, you have folks who have not been held accountable for past harms that are teaching new officers that they don't have to fear that accountability. We have a new police chief that's going to try to instill that culture change. But our hope was that federal oversight will come in and there will be a consent decree that the city is forced to enter into that will be a result of a patterns and practice investigation. And that would be one big step to bringing hope that trust will be rebuilt. We can't trust that the mayor and the city attorney handpicking what the DOJ reviews will bring any real change, right? We want the DOJ to have open time and opportunity to investigate whatever they need to investigate. So there's not a lot of hope, and it seems like time and time again we are ignored when we make specific demands. There's an opportunity missed there with that DOJ patterns and practice investigation. Our hope is that still happens, but drastic change needs to happen, because time and time again we see what feels like politicians siding with decisions that protect police officers as opposed to the people.
We want to continue this conversation. We want to remind you at home or wherever you are on your mobile device that you can submit your questions right now to our panel through that chat function right now on the WBNS YouTube channel. That's what you're watching right now. There's a chat function to the right of your screen there. Submit your questions and we will get through those. We're going to get to those questions momentarily. However, right now I want to get back to Dr. Alexander. Here's some more additional expert viewpoints on the core issues.
We just heard our panelists
discuss what it looks like for law enforcement and the community to trust one another. The National Urban League's 21 pillars call for the implementation of a 21st century community problem-oriented policing model. Dr. Alexander, from your perspective, what does a sound community policing model look like?
Well, in this century that we live in, and in this 21st century, and when we talk about 21st century policing, and we hear that term tossed around a lot, and particularly post George Floyd, we hear a lot around reformation. How do we begin to reform police departments? How do we rethink, re-engineer police departments that's going to work in a much more efficient, much more collaborative way than they have in the past? And one of the ways that you do this in your own community there in Columbus, it becomes very important that community leadership and leadership inside your police agency, whatever relationships you're building, you continue to build on those relationships, because you can become as creative as you want to be. And you can come up with a variety of different ideas as to how you build those relationships, more importantly, how you maintain those relationships when it comes even to police officer training. How about the idea that we have community members that come in and be part of training of those police officers? Everyone have their fingerprints. It's just not a police academy that's taught by police officers, but also can we have community members to come in and lecture and talk to young recruits about their communities, the importance of building those relationships. And that's from all parts of the diversity of your community there in Columbus. So you can be as thoughtful, you can be as forward thinking, and you can be as creative as you want to be. There is no one set pattern of doing this, because every community is different. But what is consistent that we all have to do across this country is that we have to have the dialogue. We have to have the communication. We have to have the willingness to want to work together. And to my police officer friends and brothers and sisters that are out there in their community that's hearing this, you are doing a great job, a tremendous job, a challenging job. But the community is asking us to be more accountable. And we're going to meet that challenge, because the more accountable we are, the better we are, the more transparent we are, the more that we're going to build those relationships, gain trust, and maintain our legitimacy with the people in which we all are sworn to protect. And the other side of that, to the community, think about it this way as well too. Be there to support your local police, because for good public safety in this country and in your community, it has to be a partnership between police and community. The police is the community, and the community is the police, as authored by the father of policing many years ago in London. So there you go.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Alexander. We heartily agree that accountability is key, as is partnership. We just want to thank you for joining us today, and we appreciate you sharing your expertise on this very important issue.
Thank you for having me. Thank you very much, and God bless all of you there in the city of Columbus.
All right, welcome back. Let's get to our panelists. We're answering your questions that you're submitting right now in the chat feature there on the YouTube/WBNS. Again, thank you so much for joining the conversation tonight. I want to pose this first question to each of you. It's been repeated several times in the chat function tonight, so it's a hot topic tonight. What does a culture change look like? We've heard that said several times tonight, but how do we take it from being a word to actually being an action?
I can share what I think it would look like. That in many instances, when an officer engages with a citizen, it's not a confrontation immediately, and especially with our juveniles. I mean, yes, the officers have to do what is appropriate in terms of their training, but it's not this in your face that creates, the fear. It's how you talk to someone. It's how you communicate with individuals in the precinct, that you patrol. It's how you engage. So for me, it's literally how police initially engages with community. And it is not a confrontational, it's congenial, it's respectful. And that's another part of the cultural piece. There's a respect of the citizens by the individual officers. That's how you would see it. And I don't think you see that now.
Pastor?
Needs to be an update on sensitivity training. I think the sensitivity training that has gone, or diversity training, is outdated. There needs to be an understanding of the culture we're serving now. And not just the police officers, but the community has to learn some things too. I don't think the community understands the role of the safety director and who he answers to or what he does. And now we've got another position that there needs to be some education on who does what, why they do it, who answers to who. And when everybody understands their roles and positions, I think we will have a better understanding of what is happening in our community.
Attorney Walton?
This is going to sound a bit aggressive, but hear me out. Destroying and rebuilding, right? So we're trying to talk about how to reform a culture that is based on a profession that has its roots in slave catching, right? If we're being honest about the history of policing in this country, and it goes into Jim Crow and then protecting white landowners' interests. And there's always been a serious interest in making the majority people in this country feel safe when it comes to policing. So black people in this country don't feel protected. They don't feel served. They feel like they are essentially being targeted in many ways, right? And so over time, this culture has continued. We have career officers who have been there 30 years and beyond, and officers that have been trained up in the same model over the years. And so no matter what training we do, no matter what policy changes we make or review, we're not going to have true culture change until we restructure the way we look at policing in Columbus, and we reallocate funds towards more social services and responses that lead to more empathy by law enforcement when looking at citizens. So to me, culture change goes deeper than policy reviews and incremental changes. We need drastic change, and that is just a reality. And so I think we have an opportunity here with the new police chief and a new look at policing and public safety in Columbus by our elected officials. And we don't want to have more missed opportunities. Again, I'll just continue to say that the lack of a pattern and practice investigation in the city is a huge missed opportunity that will hopefully be corrected. But that's culture change, actually restructuring things to fit what's needed in 2021, because what began over a century ago is not the way that we should be looking at how we interact with human beings in this country and in this city.
Chief Bryant, I'll go to you because this is exactly why Mayor Ginther went outside of the city to bring somebody in to help change the culture of the police department. Essentially, what's your plan?
Every single person on this panel hit on something important. First and foremost, cultures do not form overnight. So it is deep-rooted. Cultural change has to happen over a period of time, and you may not necessarily see that change immediately. It takes time. So it is all of the things that you said and then some. We have to, as a police department, first acknowledge that there's some things that need to change about the way that they do things, right? So that's part of it. I believe that a huge part of culture change is serve, then protect. We always talk about protect and serve, but let's talk about serve, then protect, because first and foremost, we are public servants. So I think it's extremely important that we understand the community in which we're policing. I think it's important for our academy students, our new officers, to go out and learn as much as they can about the community, even if you're not from here. We talk about equity, we talk about diversity. Even if you're not from here, if you're from somewhere completely different, you came here and you took a job. So it's extremely important that you learn as much as you can about the community. And when you do that, and when you talk to the youth, and when you engage yourself, and when you go meet with the pastors, and when you have those conversations with the business owners, and when you stop and throw a basketball with the kids standing on the corner, you learn something and you get something from those interactions. They could be 2 minutes, they could be 2 seconds, they could be 2 hours, but you get something that you may not otherwise get as opposed to going to a call for service. When you go and you have an opportunity to serve at the soup kitchen, when you have an opportunity to go pack boxes at food banks, and you understand the reason why some of those people are in the positions they're in. They weren't always in those positions. You know, they were somebody's child, they may have been doctors, lawyers, they could have been anything. But if you don't take the time to understand that you aren't just coming here to do a job, but you have to immerse yourself in the culture in which you are policing. And only then will we be able to see a change, because then if you do that, you have some sort of personal connection. I think that's important. I love Columbus. As soon as I moved here, I'm excited about this city, and I've immersed myself in the culture of Columbus. And I think that that's a big part of it. We have to make sure that we're teaching and educating and letting them know what the culture is about the community in which they serve, instill that in them, do some more training, some bias policing, do some more sensitivity training, allow community members to come in and have those conversations, do them in forums that are neutral. I think it's real important. Take police out of their setting, take the community and put us in a room in a neutral setting, not in uniform, in plain clothes, and let's have these conversations so that we can hear each other, not talk at each other. So culture is going to be something that is not going to happen overnight, but I think it's absolutely doable. But it's going to take a lot of work from everybody in this room and then some.
Yeah, I think it would be unfair to paint the whole police department with that same broad, bad brush, because there are good men and women within that department working each and every day to protect and serve our community.
Absolutely.
Let's open the forum again to this question, because we're having a great conversation here, but a viewer wants to know, how do we take the topics that we're talking about right now and give it to the officers in these communities? How does this message get to the officers?
Through what we just talked about, these conversations within the community, the training, people coming in, having those forums, the interaction. I think a big part of it is leadership. We're creating more community programs. We want to be in the schools. You know, we're talking about touching children from as early as 5th, 6th, 7th grade, because sometimes high school is too late. We want to get to them at a young age. So I think a big part of those interactions come from creating these programs and asking the community to partner with us and be able to go into the schools, go into the rec centers, and go into the churches and be able to have those interactions and build upon them. Children, they are very astute. They know when you really care and when you don't. So we can't just, go for 2 hours and pretend or have a conversation with a child and then walk away from them. You have to really be invested in the program. So we think that that's going to be a big key, bringing those community leaders together, bringing law enforcement together, creating a lot of programs, citizen radio patrol. We want to get our Citizens Police Academy back up to full swing. We're talking about bringing a lot of different community members into our house, because we want them to be able to see what we do. We want them to be able to experience some of the things the officers experience, because I think that's going to lead to a lot of fruitful dialogue.
Ms. Jackson, your idea on getting this message to the officers?
I think it comes down to providing opportunities, as the chief said, to bring officers and community together. I recently read about a program that I think is at Franklin University. Dr. Chanel Jones shared it with me, and she shared the results. And when officers had the opportunity to meet with community leaders and to have just this dialogue, many times their perspectives, were changed. But you've got to bring people together. We've been so far apart for so long, creating this. It's more than a gap. It's like a chasm. We can't do anything until we're back together.
I just spoke to a 17-year-old in a program who said, it'd be good to see the officers get outside of their patrol cars.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And we witnessed that during National Night Out. Sean, is that enough, or should more be done?
More should be done. To me, a message is sent when officers that commit crimes are treated the same as citizens that commit crimes, right? So if an officer commits a criminal act against a citizen, they shouldn't be protected by the division. There shouldn't be an internal investigation that covers that up. And so a message is sent when officers who are bad actors are treated like bad actors. And so that's a message that's sent. Beyond that, I think it's important that that we just continue to stress that culture change and the fact that we do have a new chief in town, literally, and to know that the old ways of doing things are changing, right? Because, again, far too often we have seen leaders in the city just not stand with people, right? I really have to say that, you know, as I was doing my research on the city and police community relations, I saw that, you know, years ago, after a young man was shot and killed, Mayor Coleman, you know, stood up and said, if you don't run from the police, you won't be shot, and so don't run. And so that's literally not the legal standard for allowing an officer to shoot someone. And so when messages like that are sent, it sends a message to officers that there won't be any accountability. And that's the culture shift that we need. It's decades long. So we have to send a message that, again, you will be held accountable. And that culture change is what's going to lead to the city being healed from the trauma that has been inflicted over the years. And again, not all officers are bad. I represent several black officers that have been discriminated against internally. So it's not just citizens that need protection here, it's officers internally. That's a message that needs to be sent, is that good officers will be protected. They can speak up against bad officers, and that there's a new system of policing in Columbus where the people are protected as well as the police officers.
Pastor Davis, I'll send this next question your way. Do you think rebuilding this trust issue between the community and police will lead to or even help reduce the crime numbers we're seeing here in our community?
Yes and no. Crime is not always the results of the law enforcement. That's number one. Crime sometimes is the results of trying to survive for many people in our community. It's live or die. For whatever reasons, so much is going on with our young people and others. You can't blame it all on it's economics, it's exposure, it's survival. It's the lack of parents, not just male parents, but mothers being present. It's the lack of an educational system that no longer gives everybody reading, writing, and arithmetic and the basic skill sets they need to be employed, nominally. Everybody's not going to college. It's so many things. That's a yes and a no question.
And I'd like to follow up with that. So I have these comments.
Can I finish?
I'm so sorry, Pastor.
We've been
Yes.
kind of stoic. Can I finish?
Yes.
Judge?
Yes.
The other thing is, this summer I had the privilege of being asked by President Mike Crispin, who serves as the Chief of Police of Western Whitehall, who also serves as the president of the Chiefs Association. That association, if I can take a little time, is composed of all of the police chiefs in the city of Columbus. You hadn't got here yet.
Franklin County.
Franklin County, thank you. Franklin County. And under their leadership, they wanted to have some sessions that were community involved, where they were invited grassroots organizations, school system, they invited parents. And the most powerful meeting we had was when the police chiefs came, not in uniform, and some kids, some young people showed up and spoke from their hearts. That was the transformative moment. That was the police officers becoming a part of the culture and the young people becoming a part of the culture. The only way you can have a culture change is when cultures what's the word I'm looking for? I'm a pastor, then lost my words. When they come together, I wanted a deeper word than that. I wanted to sound real educated, but when they converge, I wanted to be real deep. But when they come together, and that's when there's an understanding, and that's when there is a respect for both cultures. If I can use for an example, and I think it's a powerful example, mixed couples. mixed race couples, when they come together, their love overshadows cultural differences to the point where they're willing to learn about each other's culture and grow together. There has to be there has to be getting together, some I'm gonna use this deep word, some intimacy of relationship mentally and understanding what each other's going. Now you can talk, Judge.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm finished.
No, I was just going to share that I have regular conversations with my 87-year-old mother, who happens to be very active on Facebook and shares her opinions about all of this. But when I see her, yes, she expresses concerns about the police, but her greater concerns are about our youth.
Yes.
And the violence with our youth. And certainly does not blame it, on the officers. But what she says is that it's the responsibility of this entire community to address this issue. That's the reality. Parents, if they're there, church, schools. And then she asked this question, and I can't answer it. She says, Janet, who's taking the leadership role in this city of bringing everyone to the table to try to find solutions for our young people? And I really don't know who's doing that.
And I would say, having conversations with our youth, growing up now is totally different than when we were growing up.
Oh, yes, yes.
And they are facing so much right now, which leads me to our next question here. As we think about smart investments in social justice initiatives, what types of programmings could make our streets safer and promote greater trust between law enforcement, the community, and our young folks? Sean?
Yeah, I think, again, I mentioned it earlier, but more social services, as we're looking at law enforcement responses, right? I think that so many people in our communities are suffering, right? And Pastor mentioned it, in terms of the economics and just so many issues that lead to that suffering, right? And as we're talking about the violence in the city and the youth violence, again, there's a lack of hope for many of them because we do not have much empathy for our communities. And so, again, many times what we see is an intrusion into the life of Black people as opposed to an offer for assistance and just, again, that empathy that, we understand what they're going through and that we're here for them and that we'll be in this together, right? So more social services because far too often we have mental health issues that go undiagnosed and untreated, and the response to many people who are suffering a mental health crisis often tends to be aggressive as opposed to empathetic. So we need that, absolutely. And again, just more emphasis on therapy and healing, because I've unfortunately seen the way these families have to suffer through many things that happen, whether it's at the hands of law enforcement or just any other type of injustice. There's not many support services provided to people. I think about Tyree King, 13-year-old Tyree King, because yesterday was the 5-year anniversary of his death when he was shot and killed by Officer Bryant Mason. And I think about all the children that were involved because Tyree was a middle schooler. I think about how they have grown up the last 5 years and they've seen that their friend was shot and killed, and they have not had anyone to talk to. They've not had any forums that actually considered what that impact had on them, And so anytime I hear us talking about the violence in the city, right, I always think about the fact that we have to hold citizens accountable that commit bad acts, but also we need to set that example by saying that no matter who you are, the system will hold you accountable, right? And so I think about Tyree's schoolmates and everybody that feel like there's no accountability, feel like there's no answers. And so more support, more empathy, more understanding of the situations that lead to certain incidents as opposed to just the aftermath of that.
I want to wrap things up here with our panel with final thoughts, giving each of you an opportunity to provide 15, 20 seconds final thoughts on thoughts of rebuilding this trust between the community and police. Chief.
So I couldn't agree with you more in terms of some of the things that we need to do. So when you talk about the right response, that's one of our ways, and we want to expand that program. I think it's important for us to have this open dialogue and to do more forums, to have these conversations. I think it's real important for us to get into schools and deal with our youth and create programs like Children in Trauma Intervention, it's a city camp program where we take the holistic approach. We don't just deal with the children, we deal with the family, whether it's domestic violence, whether it's substance abuse, whether it's, you know, a mother that simply has to work 3 jobs and she's a single mother and she doesn't have time to, you know, address her children, and they're out there just, you know, in the streets with no guidance. So I think that that's part of a problem that's not just about law enforcement, it's about the community as a whole. So we have to come together and be able to address those issues.
There's one sector of the community that we haven't mentioned at all in terms of their responsibility, and that's corporate. So one of the primary reasons for a lot of this is poverty. So many people are living in poverty. So why aren't we paying living wages? Why aren't they creating training opportunities for our young people? I mean, we could take a look at all we were talking about, and where's the responsibility and what's the role of corporate Columbus to address these issues?
I guess for me it would be a return back to the basics: reading, writing, arithmetic, and a faith walk, and life skills. There used to be a time when your leaders were involved in church. That's my area. You don't have that anymore. You would sit beside the police chief, you would sit beside the mayor, especially those of us who've been kissed by the sun. And there needs to be a return, especially in our educational system, of life skills, not just reading, writing, and arithmetic, but how to cook, how to cut wood, how to screw a screw, sheet metal work, those basic skills, painting, that have drifted out of our school system that we all got. And as a matter of fact, we got it in middle school, that you no longer get. And I think that would, that way people can get jobs. And then we can talk more about minimum wages and living a life where that when you work 40 hours a week, you can pay your rent, you can eat, you can pay your bills, you can enjoy life.
Final comments?
Sorry about that. You know, I appreciate all the comments up here, right? And I think that what we are all talking about is, again, humanizing the people of this city, right? You know, too often we see headlines and we see a headline about the growing homicide rate, or we see a headline about, you know, an incident of police violence, or, you know, just a negative headline. But we don't consider what happens underneath that, right? So we do need a living wage. We do need opportunities. We need hope, you know? And so my closing thought would be that in the future, I hope that as tragedies occur in our city, that everyone responds with empathy, and that we think about how to come together and support each other and move forward together, as opposed to pointing fingers or you know, not looking to the greater good in our ultimate end game, which is a city where people feel happy and free and safe. You know, our conversation is about public safety tonight, and that's what this is all centers around: the public safety of our people in the city.
A good place to put a period on this conversation. Our thanks to our panelists tonight, Attorney Walton, Bishop Dr. Reverend Davis, Ms. Jackson, and Chief Bryant. Thank you all so much for your time and discussion about this critical issue here in our community. Let's close this out tonight. I want to introduce Christy Angel. She's the president and CEO of YMCA Columbus.
On behalf of YWCA Columbus, the Columbus Urban League, National Urban League, and WBNS 10 TV, thank you for joining us tonight. To add to Stephanie's opening comments, it is sobering to know that only 1 in 4 Americans say they trust the federal government to do what is right most of the time. 3/4 of our country believe we have too little confidence in one another. Deloitte and other expert observers say we face a crisis of trust. And this crisis is more pronounced, profound, and problematic when applied to the criminal justice system. One of the founders of our modern policing, Sir Robert Peel, once said, that the community is never safe until we can all work together. Tonight, we showed what it means to extend a hand, talk, and work together. We demonstrated what the National Urban League, Dr. Alexander, and many others believe is the foundational first step toward a more just community, opening a dialogue and finding common ground that leads to greater trust. I want to thank my friends, no, my family in the Urban League movement for including YWCA Columbus as part of today's conversation. I encourage you to stay in this conversation with us. One way you can keep talking is to join YWCA Columbus as we discuss community safety and the role of systems in our community during our Activists and Agitators event to be held on October 27th. Help us explore how we build a Columbus that is equitable for all. And I applaud the National and Columbus Urban Leagues, Andrew Kinsey, and WBNS, our participants, and all of you for finding the courage and compassion to advance this critical dialogue. Thank you and have a good night.